Hi everyone, I'm Lauren Malhoit and I will be moderating this motley crew here on automation and orchestration. Just want to make it clear that if this is an interactive event, so it's a possibility to win a VM Underground wristband with your good questions and comments. So with that, I'll let these guys go ahead and introduce themselves.
Hi, my name is Luc Dekens, and I'm addicted to PowerShell and PowerCLI. No, I was quite.
Hi, Luke.
I was quite lucky to be engaged with PowerCLI from the early stages, and I doubled along a bit. So that's it.
Okay. I'm Alan Renouf. No, sorry. I'm Mike Foley. I work in tech marketing, and I focus on vSphere security and have a great deal of interest around automation used as a security tool.
I'm Alan Renouf. I am a product manager at VMware, and I focus on our CLIs and how we work with automation frameworks like Puppet and Chef and Ansible and Sol. So if you guys have any questions or anything you want to do with VMware, automation-wise or CLI-wise, please come and see me, say hi. That's me.
Hi, I'm Josh Atwell. I'm a cloud solutions architect for SolidFire. I'm on this panel because I helped organize this. I'm kidding. they asked me first. I work at SolidFire as a cloud solutions architect, focusing on automation and orchestration. So using that stuff to make our storage easier.
Emad Younis. I work for GDT as a virtualization architect, and I kind of dabble a little bit here and there with PowerCLI, Orchestrator, and a little bit of VCAC.
All right, awesome. So we have some questions that we've kind of seeded here to get started, but again, feel free to jump in and try and drill these guys and, you know, stump the chump and all that good stuff. So first of all, let's go with, do you guys see this kind of DevOps orchestration movement being VMware admin's job, or do you see it becoming like a new job, a new role within companies? Go ahead and jump in for anyone that's, Josh, you look like you're chomping at the bit to say something there.
Well, you know, as one of the authors of the upcoming DevOps for VMware Administrators book.
Oh, cha-ching!
Shameless plug. Is this a sales pitch?
I couldn't resist. No, but seriously, I think what we're finding with the DevOps type of movement is that, you know, the operations side is saying, you guys can't give us proper requirements, so we can't deliver, and the development side saying, you guys can't deliver in the time frames that we need and what we need. And they're finally getting to a point where, oh, here's a methodology that we can use and work together to better communicate and get better alignment. And so I think it's really a cultural, you know, it's a top-down in most cases, but it really has to be mutually driven. That there's typically not going to be, you know, just one point that says we're driving this.
So I have two questions really. When did DevOps become a movement? And also,
when the book was released.
How many people were? How many people,
oh, not mine. The other one.
How many people in here were doing DevOps stuff before it was called DevOps? Yeah, right.
There's your career path.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that leads to the real question. What is DevOps then?
Yeah, exactly.
I'm not answering that one.
Well, so to your point, yes, obviously there have been, you know, everyone's been scripting and coding and other such things that to get kind of a DevOps feel going, but there is this movement with all of the new tools, VCAC, UCS Director, Puppet, Chef,
Lab Manager?
Lab Manager, sure.
I mean, seriously, I mean, that was the original DevOps.
With all of these new tools, I mean, is that going to become a new person's job or a team? You know, is that a new team, or is that a team that's kind of the liaison between dev and ops, or do you see it just being everyone taking it on?
I think it's a career path for many people. Mm-hmm. You know, if you think back around the first introduction of virtualization into an environment, kind of got in a little under the covers, almost a cowboy sort of movement. You know, no one knew everything was running in production on top of virtualization until someone actually asked what that VMware stuff was. And I think DevOps has that same sort of changing from the ground up and getting things done, and then people just going, oh, now we rely on it? I guess we need to start investing in it. And it's the same from a career path standpoint. I think folks naturally, VI admins who have any sort of background in scripting and coding, it just makes total sense to them. And developers, it may not make sense because they're very focused on, creating, say, their kernel module or what have you. They don't. The VI admin, just by being a VI admin, has a much bigger view of how everything has to work.
Mm-hmm. It's very relevant in a VMware environment because, mostly it's people wanting to get speed out of things, right? They want to develop things faster, they want to get it out to production faster. So of course, the principles still apply in a VMware environment, and we're adjusting our tools to make sure that we fulfill the needs of the DevOps folks that are coming up. But I think the actual DevOps word and movement or department or whatever you call yourself changes within different companies, but it is definitely relevant, and it's all about speed.
Mm-hmm. Well, and compliance, right?
Yeah.
I think even the
compliance
tools,
is not security.
The tools today.
True.
The tools today, like VCAC and UCS Director, they let any administrator jump right in and start becoming that DevOps type guy, right? They're simple enough for you to start getting familiar and then start to add that next layer of customization.
Mm-hmm. Well, what you're really looking at though is it's less about ops and more about enabling developers to move at the pace that is appropriate for their development cycle, right? And one of the interesting, was it the Phoenix project? They kind of go into like this DevOps methodology and how this. Who's read the Phoenix project? Okay, if your hand's not up, check it out. If this is a topic even remotely interesting to you, it gives you a good perspective. But what it really comes down to is enabling the development team to, be agile in what they're doing and move at their pace rather than being constructed to the pace of the operations team. And I think that's where you see, as a virtualization administrator with VCAC and VCOps and vCenter Orchestrator and all these things, it's really about us being able to create a framework that the developers can then utilize, right? They are the consumers, so we build it so that they can consume it at the pace that they need to, and it behooves us to communicate back so that we can modify that framework. That's why AWS is so successful, right? AWS this is what we have, and then everybody goes out and then uses it, and it works. And then they modify it over time because the needs and the use cases have changed.
You should write a book on this stuff, Joe.
Honestly, I just read that chapter. I didn't write that chapter.
Well, okay, so one of the questions in here, I don't really like, it's basically, how do you get started in DevOps, and then it lists like all the tools, but...
Buy Josh's book.
Yeah.
Now available on Amazon.
But how do you get started?
Only.
It's not really, how do you get your company started, I guess I should say, or the IT department, what have you? I've heard it's not good to just say, oh, we're going to use Puppet, and then go from there. It's actually more...
It's like alcoholism. You have to first identify that there's a problem.
Sure.
And admit that there's a problem. No, that's funny, but it's the absolute fact and truth. Nothing changes until you identify that there's a problem and identify the value assigned with solving the problem.
I think you find the task that you continuously have to do manually, and basically create a process and then start coding for that. And then keep climbing the mountain until now you have this workflow with one click of a button, boom, it just does everything for you.
It's identifying and managing the constraint.
So if you were, let's say, a consultant, and you go into a company, what's the first question you ask them if you were going to help them with a DevOps situation?
Me, I would probably ask, what are your security policies and what are your management policies? Mm-hmm. And if your security policy clearly delineates, VMs have to be built a certain way, they have to have certain settings, they have to be on certain networks and so on and so forth, that's all automatable. And that is when you start thinking about building things, whether it's VCAC workflows or Puppet or Chef manifests or recipes to create those VMs up front so that you don't have to then bolt-on security at the end or what have you, that is probably a good place to start, because then you can start to gain the acceptance of the people who make those policies. And that is no longer a technical discussion, that is a business discussion. And once you can have the business discussion, the technical stuff you can work out later.
Who invited the security guy to an automation panel? Come on.
I think it was you.
No, seriously, I mean...
seriously, why did you invite me?
I agree with what you're saying. It's just
damn well should.
Where I've used automation and where I've seen automation introduced, and I'm calling it automation rather than DevOps. Okay,
Sure.
I thought this was an automation panel. So where I've seen it is when people are bored of doing something, when they're sick of doing a task all the time, when it takes a long time to do something in the GUI, they'll be like, why am I doing this every single time? Why don't I just replace this with a script? And it starts building from there. People starting with the simple stuff. Like, it might start with reporting, for example. I have to produce a report every day and give somebody a certain amount of information. So they'll start with that. They'll start getting their hands wet with automation, and then they'll start realizing, okay, this stuff's pretty cool. I know the tools that I'm using, and they'll move on and start doing more and more automation. And policies and security obviously fits into that, and you have to kind of come backwards after that and make sure that you're doing the right thing for the company. Yep. But I tend to see it starting from the bottom and moving up.
I think you find the business case and what tools are available to them, because it could be based off licensing, right? They may not be able to get a VCAC or something like that, right? But they do have Orchestration, for example, and Orchestration has a bunch of built-in workflows that you can basically take what's there and customize it to your needs. So there's more than one way to skin a cat. Onyx is another great tool, right? If you're not familiar with how the process works, you can run that in the background as you click through your VI client, and it will show you what's going on, and you could take that and bring it into your workflow or script. So
we have a question right here.
So I just started working in a more agile kind of method with using Puppet and writing some Puppet code and using that mostly to bring up just a Linux server. So and part of doing that is using continuous integration, certainly like Jenkins, to test all the Puppet code. Now, if I wanted to use, say, like a Power CLI script to do something inside of vSphere, what kind of testing tools and or how would I create some kind of CI environment where I could create the script, I could have it tested syntactically and everything, but then actually have the script run basically in a QA environment in order to make sure that's doing what it's doing. Like, how do you do that with vSphere, especially if I've got a script that's going to run against a host, or if it's going to run against vCenter, and I know it has to bring up certain VMs, and then I want to test that it's actually doing those things.
Yeah.
How do you do that?
There's a ton of different methods you could use. I've certainly seen integration with Power CLI and Jenkins, but you're more talking about the infrastructure that you use. Sorry, should I repeat the question? Did everybody hear that? So he was more asking about the tool set that you should use if you want to test your Power CLI scripts. Is that correct? Right. Summarizing.
Yeah, be able to test it and spin it up in kind of like a dev environment.
Yeah, exactly. So actually testing the code that you write, how would you do that, right? What tools exist? So I've seen a bunch of different tools out there. There's integration with Jenkins, where people have actually written their own scripts and actually use Jenkins to do that kind of stuff. But also, you're starting to talk really about nested virtualization maybe, so that you can test some of this stuff. We've got emulators for vCenter so that you can test other parts of it. There's various different things you can do to make sure that your environment and your scripts work.
Yeah. And then of course there's AutoLab. If people aren't familiar with AutoLab, it is a automation, oddly enough, will automatically deploy out a lab in either on an ESXi host or Workstation or Fusion. On top of that, I had to look up the name to make sure I had it right, but Revelo Systems has an online, they'll do nested virtualization in AWS, and it's pay as you go. RAVELLO. They're actually here at VMworld, but if I'm not mistaken, I saw some of people. Yeah. So, what it really comes down to is, first rule of automation is, don't test it in production.
Says the guy who tests in production, right?
I used to. But in order to follow the first rule, you actually have to have something similar to test with, right? You want to maintain as close to versioning and things like that so you have compatibility, because unfortunately not everything is backwards compatible. You do a good job on that though.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions out there? You
You guys were talking about Onyx previously.
Yeah.
Year and a half ago when I was starting to learn Power CLI, and obviously the commandlets weren't all there for everything, so you would use Onyx to continue on. As the transition away from Windows client, is Onyx going to be more integrated into web clients? So when I tell people about learning these organizations, is that like a send them to go with Onyx basically all up?
I'd like to repeat that question so that everybody heard. Alan?
No, I don't think you said Alan. I think it was a general question.
Alan? Is Onyx extensible to the web client? Or will it be?
Yeah, but
I mean, Onyx obviously sits. Onyx is a tool that you can download from VMware Flings, VMware Labs, and it's a fling. So it's something that we give you that our engineers have produced that isn't supported, but it's something that sits basically in between your vSphere client and your vCenter server. So Onyx will sit right here, and you connect your Onyx to your vCenter server, and you can connect your client to Onyx, and then you do a bunch of stuff in your client, and you say to Onyx, record. And then you say, okay, stop recording, because I've done what I wanted to do, and then it will spit out some code. Now that code isn't
Clean.
optimal.
Isn't optimal, thank you, that's a good word, optimal.
I was gonna say clean.
It won't give you, if I create a new VM, it won't spit out the code that says new-VM in Power CLI, right? It'll actually give me the calls that it did to write to the API, and it'll give us the low-level commandlets, or if anyone's ever seen the get view commandlet, it'll use that kind of code to produce exactly the same thing you did when you created that new VM. And if you run that code again, yes, you will get the same thing. And it's not just Power CLI code, I should point that out. It will do JavaScript for if you're using VCO. It will do C#, I think. It does a bunch of different languages. And SOAP, thank you. So it's a way of just basically recording what you've got and understanding what went on underneath, and maybe putting that into a function and creating your own functions around that code. So it's a great tool, and I've totally not answered your question so far.
So in simpler context, it's like getting directions from a southerner, which I am. Well, you see, you go down Highway 10, and then you get to where the big tree is, and you turn right, and it just kind of tells you about where you're supposed to go, but you have to kind of sort out what the big tree is and where the old farm is and things like that. There's a little work behind it.
What Josh is saying is, bless your heart.
The thing that, the why I explained it is because basically it sits in between the C# client and not the web client, right? Yeah. I mean, the web client sits somewhere completely different, and it's not actually run from your client side environment. So we can't intercept the SOAP calls that are being sent to the vSphere and actually turn those into nice code for you. So is it going to go away? Onyx, as you know it, sure, it's going to go away, right? But we are looking at other ways that we can do that kind of stuff through the web client. I'm not going to promise anything, but we're definitely looking at ways that we can provide a similar kind of thing.
Like I said, it was a great tool.
Yeah, I agree.
To understand what's happening,
Oh, yeah.
especially for things that didn't have direct commands.
Yeah, 100%. It's a great learning tool, and it's great for understanding what's going on underneath.
Yeah, I used it all the way up to
sorry.
5.5, and it works great. And I've tried it with the web client, and like Alan said, there's no integration, so there's no way around it. So you can just shoot him a couple of emails every day until he finally just caves in.
Well, I mean, now I actually have that. I have a program that does that. Just sends regular emails.
By the way, Luke was going to say something to us.
No problem.
Go
But
ahead.
go ahead. If you need another plug. No, just a remark. There is another solution about Onyx, but it's called the SDK Reference. You find everything in there as well. And I use Onyx as well from time to time, but the big disadvantage, and Alan already pointed it out, it will create exactly the same thing that you did in the interface with the commandlets or with the vSphere client. So if you call a VM, test VM, it will not show you how to get that value. It will exactly, literally call the new one test VM as well. So it has its shortcomings. And that's where the reference helps you. That will document all the APIs, most of the APIs. But it requires a bit more work, I'm afraid.
Anyone else? All right. So I think the question a lot of people ask that's almost impossible to answer, and it's definitely an it depends question, but if you give use cases, that would be great. What tools do you use to get started if you've never done anything in an automation,
Notepad.
DevOps, you know, whatever kind of
At
Notepad.
At least Notepad++.
Well, give us a use case.
Yeah, okay.
Give us
For
a,
the advanced user, Notepad++ then.
give us a use case. What would you use that for?
But the simplest thing, writing a script is text. So you take whatever text editor you want, that is enough. But as you go along, you will discover you have other needs. While you're writing your script, you want to put breakpoints in there. Now, in the meantime, with the progression of PowerShell, there have been improvements to the ISE that they deliver with it. So you can put breakpoints, you can look at content of variables in between in your script, see what it's doing. There used to be some other tools on the market, paying tools. They disappeared, most of them. So ISE is coming up on free, is coming up in that market, and there's a lot of add-ons being added which allow you to inspect variables, put breakpoints, put loops in there. So it's,
so you did a great job of answering the question from a Power CLI point of view, but I don't think automation is just Power CLI.
No, of course not.
You know, it certainly is for some places, but you know, it really depends on your use case, what you're trying to automate. We've got a bunch of different technologies at VMware that allow you to automate. You know, what VCAC does and what VCO does and what Power CLI do are different things for different use cases. So the other turnaround question that I get from that is like, oh, you know, is VCO going to replace Power CLI, or is VCAC going to replace VCO? And you know, it's like one of those. No, they all do their own separate things. Use the right tool for the right job.
And you may find that you'll use all three tools.
Exactly, that's
where
the
you'll
point,
use
right?
VCAC, calling a VCO workflow, which runs a PowerShell script.
Yes.
Yeah. Or if you're just wanting to export data, yeah, use Power CLI, right? It's the right tool for the right job. It allows me to instantaneously, quickly get the results. If I'm going to write a self-service provisioning item that I want my customers to go out and get, am I going to use Power CLI for that? I probably could, but I'm not going to, right? That's what VCAC is there for. It's pre-written to do all that kind of stuff with all the authentication and all the workflows and everything in there. Similarly, if I'm looking for integration between products that exist and I'm not someone that writes scripts and I want to just drag and drop boxes around, then use VCO. It really does depend on what you're trying to do as to what tool you use. And again, Puppet and Chef and all those kind of tools, they come at it from a different angle. If I want desired state, if I want to know my system looks exactly the same way as if I've written down right here, right now, then that's the kind of tool that you would use for that. So, I agree, they're great tools for PowerShell, but from the VMware tact and from the whole automation angle, I would question what tool you use and come up with the use case first.
So I'll take it one level more primal than that. Before you automate anything, you have to know where you are, where you want to be, and all the steps in between.
The process.
Fact, you have to know the process. And in order to do that, there's a lot of us running in an environment will have a run book on how to do a process. And if you don't, they have these really awesome things. They're bright white, little markers, draw pictures, whiteboard it. And we all have whiteboards, we're in IT. So whiteboard the process, get an understanding. And one of the things that gives for you is that if you identify assumptions or identify places where that workflow may fork out, and require different things depending on what response you get back, well then you know that PowerShell may not be the way to go. Or you may say, well, we need approval on this. Well, VCO and VCAC together would be perfect for that. Or maybe this is really heavy infrastructure, UCS Director or VCO plugins. So whiteboarding it out, that's the best first place to start.
All right, we have another question.
Last time I tried writing some Power CLI for Vue to monitor some tools, and I found it really difficult to get some state information. So I'm wondering, when was the last time Power CLI for Vue was updated, and is it going to be refreshed soon?
Oh.
That's a good question.
Take a deep,
Alan, do you want
take
this
a
one?
deep breath, Alan.
This is why you're sitting in the middle seat, buddy.
You have to buy him a drink later to get the real answer.
The question was, what the hell's going on with Power CLI for Vue?
Well, it is the year of VDI.
Again.
Wasn't that like
Again.
the last 5 years?
That's a good question. I don't know. I can't answer that. I am in discussion with the product managers from the Vue team, and it's looking good. But I obviously cannot talk about forward stuff. I can just say that, yeah, we're looking at it. I totally realize the issues you have. I'm quite famous within VMware for doing a blog post before I joined VMware about how crap those commandlets are. I just realized this is being recorded. So yeah, we're looking at it.
Crap is an English word for absolutely outstanding.
Yes, it is.
Just to add,
That's great.
did you also talk with the update manager people in the meantime?
Man.
Luke, you're on the panel here. Come off here.
No, I'm a
They're the
customer
ones
as well.
supposed to be dropping the bombs.
All right, we have another question right here.
So if I'm looking at the data center infrastructure as a whole, and we have storage, we have networking, we have virtualization, we have host databases. Security. Automation, in my mind, covers all of those. Instead of going down tribal, the question I'm trying to get to is more of the God level. So is there a trend or requirement or that's going to standardize the APIs and conversations and methods between all those? And follow-up, is VMware becoming that glue? Not holding it all together.
No.
I have my opinions, but
Certainly.
Start with
I
him.
work for VMware.
I mean, so our goal is to get to the software-defined data centers somehow, right? So what I would say is, I mean, you touched on a lot of points there, right? I would say focus on one area, okay? Whether it be storage or, your VMs, and get that going. And then start connecting the other pieces until you can get.
So
I'm a storage vendor, so not as just a regular user.
Oh, this was a loaded question.
The storage vendor that I have to decide or recommend for anybody running this platform internally is which way we should be developing this.
Right.
Should we open this up for PowerShell? Should we open this up for some APIs and REST or not?
yeah.
What's going to be the way to go? And then not find ourselves to use down the road. Oh, well, you guys are stuck with this thing that died a year and a half ago.
Right.
So
Yeah.
I'm happy to tackle that one because from my
Because it's in his book.
well, I love this guy. I actually don't make any money on the books. It's crap. Yes, this is recorded. I know, but here's the interesting take for me. When I worked at Cisco, I did internal IT. Right, I was doing automation to try to keep everything online. I couldn't do squat with storage. Nothing. Like it was dead end on almost everything because it wasn't extensible enough. Everything was closed off. The best I could ever do was an expect script. And well, if you've ever tried to do, I see a lot of smiles. You already know how this story ends, right? This episode's a repeat. NetApp.
Probably networking was better.
No, it wasn't. I didn't even try. I never tried with networking. I just gave up. Yeah, I know. But it's the same problem. Like these infrastructure components were never built to be extensible like that. They just weren't. They were never designed to build. And for a company to re-platform their architecture that runs their infrastructure component, whatever that device is, whether it be storage or network, that's a huge undertaking. There's a reason why 1PK and Open Daylight and things like that are taking time. There's a reason why Viper is being developed and released and integrations are done. Because this stuff is really hard. You need that Rosetta Stone, that translator in between that says, oh, you want to create a new LUN or a new volume, this is how it has to be done on EMC Array. This is how it has to be done on NetApp. And full transparency, working at SolidFire, one of the main, I hate storage. I don't really care about it, right? But I care about that extensibility of infrastructure. And being at a company where it's a wide open API, there's not a single thing on that piece of infrastructure that I can't do with an API call. Nothing. And it's a direct API call. And I bring this up not because I say, hey, everybody go to SolidFire. You're welcome to if that works for your use case. But it's that is where things are moving. You cannot answer your question about managing infrastructure outside of his response, which was 100% accurate, until more infrastructure is more extensible and more accessible. And VMware can't solve that. You can help.
We can help, yeah. but we're producing the software-defined data center at the end of the day, right? We're giving you that option to abstract the hardware somewhat away. I mean, you're never going to... Shouldn't say that. I work for VMware. You may never abstract the hardware completely away because you're going to have features within the hardware that you need to plumb up, right? Yeah. So, I mean, we obviously need to make our software extensible enough to help you out. And you were worried about investing in a certain area and then that area not existing in the future. We should talk about that separately, by the way, because I want to talk to you and I have the right person to put you in contact with that will tell you about our future and how we're doing that. But yeah, we're creating the software-defined data center, right? It's our job to abstract the nightmare of hardware away and give you this one-stop shop that you just produce it, and it doesn't matter where you produce it or what hardware it's on, it works.
Yeah, I mean, that is the fundamental component of software-defined data center, right? Is the fact that software can manipulate, manage, and instruct infrastructure to do what needs to be done.
So are we going to have tickle scripts to manage our switches?
Tickle scripts? Maybe.
I believe someone said a while back that they've been doing automation on network switches for a long time, and I said tickle doesn't count.
Yeah, I don't touch networking.
Was that a security joke or a network joke? I didn't get it.
It was a network joke. Okay. You still wouldn't get it.
Yeah. Kind of like a UDP packet.
Oh no, let's not. Okay, next question.
Are there any other questions out there? No? No one's interested? Oh, go ahead.
I work in a VAR space, and all of our clients we can't expect to learn automation, or they may not have the desire to. How do you see consultancy fitting with creating the glue that holds software-defined data centers together?
Making a boatload of money.
It's called professional service organizations.
Within that, professional service organizations, I'm seeing multiple different ways of charging within my geography. As an example, do you see more from looking at VCO or PowerShell as an option? Do you see consultancies charging per workflow or per script or per hour in this type
per solution?
Yeah.
Repeat the question.
Yeah. So the question was, I'm sorry, you're the moderator. What am I doing? Go ahead.
Go for it. No, you seem to do it quite well.
So the question was, how are
the mute button here?
No, there's not. Professional service organizations, how are they charging? How are they allowing organizations to take advantage of that capability and that option? I was just recently in that sales space, and Mike's spot on. It's per solution. And it really comes to what I said earlier. Where are you today, and where do you want to be? And I think that's been a big challenge that a lot of people had with cloud and getting into that private cloud and realizing the dream that does somebody
drop
call
the mic.
Disapproves.
Yeah, I was just like, man. So that's the dream that VMware is moving us to, and a lot of organizations are gaining success in that. But the challenge is automation doesn't develop itself. Right? It takes time, it takes effort and energy, and I tell this to my manager on a regular basis. Right? It's this stuff does take time, and you have to be able to identify where you want your end goal to be, reduce scope creep, and that I think is how this stuff is getting implemented.
You have to go in and look at your scope of work, right? Like Josh said, where are we going to start? Okay, where do we want to go? And anything after that becomes another project, right? It becomes an extension to that project. So
I think there's a lot of money to be made in automation at the moment, though. I mean, there's a lot of different areas that need tying together and integrating for a system to work end-to-end, or for a company's process to work end-to-end. And I'm not just talking about VMware software here. I'm talking about the initial phone call from that customer or raise of that request from the customer, all the way through to it happening. You're touching multiple different systems. Not all of them are VMware. So writing that integration there and actually helping your customers write those scripts or workflows or VCAC blueprints. You know, it really, it's that work that's going to get you the money. And I think right now is the time when automation is probably, you're going to make the most as a consultant.
Yeah, and I will say, you know, for those of you that have pretty strong skills in automation, those skills are highly sought after.
Yeah.
Because of exactly what he just said.
If you can write glue code and put stuff together, you become like the key person for developing solutions, because you've got things like VCAC, VCO, Power CLI that are all the tools to actually do it, but putting it all together and presenting a solution to a customer, that is where you can, the sum of the parts is great, is much bigger, you know.
So I mean that leads to a concept that I've been talking a lot with people about, of the infrastructure developer. Right? It is a person who has to have infrastructure architectural understanding of all of those pieces and what that glue is required, and what glue works where and how it sticks. But also is a developer that can actually programmatically take advantage of whatever extensibility is available on that infrastructure in the environment, because there are limitations with everything, right? And being able to put that together. And the interesting thing is that's happening more from developers getting into infrastructure than it is from infrastructure architecture going into developers, because the need is outpacing the tools development. And you know, I mean, VMware is doing a great job of getting new stuff out, but you know, not everything is drag and drop, click and go. You actually have to develop.
And that normally isn't just one person. That's normally a team of people, right? You get the people that know the best about their domain, you put them in a room, and you say, look, this is what we want to achieve.
DevOps! Sorry.
You know, you say to the network guys, this is what we're going to automate from your point of view. The storage guys, this is what we're going to automate from your point of view. Let's tie this solution together, get everybody on board, because let's face it, if you go to a storage guy or somebody who does a certain role within a company, and they only do that, they're scared you're going to take their job away if you start talking about automation. Yeah. Whereas really, if you bring them on board and say, you know how you hate giving us LUNs every single time we call you up, well, how about you just give us a bunch of space and we carve that up how we want, but you only give us the rights to do it for that certain space. We're taking a bunch of work from you, we're automating it, and when we've run out, we'll come back to you and we'll sort out something else, right? You can still manage it, you still work it out. You know, it's about getting everybody in the same room and just making sure everybody's on the same page.
So notice how he didn't invite security to that discussion, right?
No one invites security. Yeah. They just say no.
Yeah. But to add to that,
security puts the no in innovation.
Yes.
To add to that, so you know, you're not taking a job away. You're actually freeing that individual up, so they can start innovating and automating and looking down, you know, the future for that particular realm.
Yes.
Now, yay!
I joked about, you know, security putting the no in innovation. Those folks that have read the Phoenix Project saw what happened to the security guy in the story.
Don't let that happen.
By bringing him in as part of the solution, they ended up with a much better solution going forward that was a lot easier for them to pass their audits and do the right things out of the box. That is really where things have to go. So if
only had like a mental breakdown.
Yeah.
Right. Well, I mean,
it happens.
That's called a story arc.
I think that was called VMworld 2012.
Yep.
By involving all of the concerned parties, even if you have to drag some of those concerned parties kicking and screaming into the room, you will end up with a better solution, because the last thing you want to do is go through talking with the customer, coming up with the solution, everyone's working together, and then, oh shit, we got to call the security guy.
And there goes our family.
And he walks in and he goes, oh, absolutely not. I don't trust this, right? If he's not part of it, he will be your roadblock later on.
Now, I gotta add, because the kicking and screaming part is a really scary concept. You don't say that to your management when you're trying to implement stuff like that. The kicking and screaming part, they'll see it. How many storage administrators in the crowd? I see 1, 2. Okay, so we got about 6. How many of you would give access and control to a third party to manipulate, manage, and automate your storage? Hands? Any? No, any? Right. So
same with networking.
Right, and exactly the same is typically with networking. So the coming together and being able to identify is just like the VMware administrator is saying, here is a framework, developers, that you can work in. Infrastructure managers who are managing storage and compute and you have to be able to compartmentalize and carve out and say, hey guys, this is your framework, your wireframe that you can work in, and we're going to start here, right? Baby steps, and we're going to start moving. But that has to be done as a collaborative effort to meet an objective, identifying a constraint and attacking that constraint. Because if you don't have it, your storage admins out there, network admins are like, I'm not going to give you that kind of access. It's not worth the risk and possible pain. So.
All right, we have time for a couple more questions. This guy had a question too, and then we'll go to you.
So in working with Puppet, one of the things I noticed is that you define what you want your servers to look like. It's very declarative, and then it goes out and it makes sure that those servers enforces that state, right? And then it reports back to you and says, okay, it's either not, I have to make a change, whatever. But can you use Puppet to manage vSphere? Can you actually have it configure vCenter server? Can you have it configure update manager? Can you make sure that no one goes in after the fact and tweaks all those little buttons and knobs that are there? Or if it's not Puppet, what other tool is there to define what your whole virtual infrastructure should look like, and then keep enforcing the state over and over and over again, so that so someone can't go in and then change it, and if they do change it, it's logged.
I want to hear what Luc has to say on that one.
I do too.
But independent.
I can hear him breathing really heavily.
No. That was not part of the discussion. But no, independent if you're using Puppet or whatever, because there's another tool, DSC, that I've been playing around with from Microsoft, and they're going a long way, and they're doing approximately the same thing. What you need to do is you take away the security permissions from all these other guys who can turn the little knobs and tweaks, and you let only your configuration tool do the stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
That's where the security people come in at a certain point early in your design of your architecture, how you set this up. The problem is you have to take away some stuff from the administrators.
But that's okay, because it's all part of a least privilege sort of model. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, far too many customers out there are running as cowboys with everyone has a shared root account on their ESX servers.
But it's
and
hard.
there's 50 people with full admin privs on vCenter.
It's not hard. It's not hard.
It's not.
I tend to disagree with that. And that's why I don't buy this DevOps thing. It's a new fashion word, because we have been doing this for years. We have security cases. We are controlling air traffic. We have security cases, and we have been doing that since 25 years.
Let me tell you about some of the security software.
Every software that goes into production needs to be controlled, needs to be very finely defined what goes in there, that it cannot be changed afterwards. DevOps, okay, it's a nice new name for a package, but we have been doing that. We called it quality assurance, we called it an architecture team. It's the same thing.
We call it good IT.
All right, we have time for one more question.
I'm sorry I wound him up.
No, but
go ahead.
So far, except with the exception of the last question, it's been more about progression. How do you start? How do you power? How do you get? And we kind of just touched on this a little bit now, but if this is a progression and we're doing better things, is the end state complete immutable infrastructure?
sorry, that last part.
The end state what?
Is the end game complete immutable infrastructure?
Well, here's the fun part about that. Even with software defined, where software is controlling the behavior and adjusting how the infrastructure in the data center is operating, there still has to be someone to tell the software what the constraints are and what the guardrails are. So there is never going to be a time, hopefully, unless Skynet actually becomes an actual thing, that it's not likely you're going to see an instance where people aren't still maintaining some level of control. You're just going to find that as infrastructure becomes more extensible, that the tools like desire state configuration tools and things like that become more prevalent and more mature, that less and less effort has to go into those tasks and more goes into building out the high. I look at it like Thomas the Train, right? You can do all the tracks and stuff. That's what the software-defined data center manager is. He's building those tracks and saying where Thomas can go.
So Dooley is the poster boy for software-defined data
Yes,
centers.
he is. Yeah, he sure is.
I think, you know, every process that you create, you can always make better, right? So even though you created process A, in a week you may look at it and say, you know what, I can add to this and make it even better. And so it's always going to be a continuous process. So you'll always have to be involved. Humans will always have to.
I really think this is a journey, not a destination.
All right, guys. Sorry, we have to cut it off. But thank you so much to the panelists, and thanks for coming and asking your questions. And stay for the next few rounds.
Thank you.
Thanks.